So let's start by talking about the most basic HTTP event. So I have a user and this user is connected to the app function using an HTTP URL. So there is a serverless create command that can be used to create this particular service. Of course, it's a boilerplate and it just returns a hello world. So let's use this particular command to create that particular serverless application. So the command is very straightforward. It's serverless create -t azure-nodejs. So that means it's going to be a Node.js application. And then I need to give the name of my project. So it's going to be my HTTP service. So let's create this particular project. So the boilerplate has been downloaded. So you can go to that particular folder, which is basically also the name of the project. So I'll do a CD. So let's look at the files that have been downloaded. So first thing, there is a package.json file. So what we need to do initially is we need to do npm install to install all the packages for this particular application. Okay, so the package.json files has installed all the dependencies and that is within the node modules. So the next thing we need to do is we need to talk about the host file. So the host file is currently empty. Now here is where you can add all the app function related and the HTTP related configuration. Now that is something that I will show you in the next lecture. So basically let this remain as it is. So let's just, for the time being, let's just leave this file alone. And then the most important file is the serverless.yml file. So here is where all the configuration, all the important configuration lies. So let's look at them one by one. So first there is the service, then there is the provider. The provider is again Azure. Then there is the region and the runtime. So the runtime again is Node.js. We also have an environment variable and this variable will have a value of foo. So this is something we can check out once we have deployed this application in Azure. And so this is basically the plugin that we used for Azure, serverless Azure plugin. So this was something that we had installed earlier in our previous lecture where I showed you all the dependencies that you had to install. And now let's look at the main part. This is basically the functions. This is where the functions and the events are stored. Now here the name of the function is hello and handler represents the pointer to this particular function. So this particular function code resides within this particular path. So if I go to source, if I go to handlers, and then within that, then there is something called as hello.js. So hello.js has a function called say hello. So this is the code that executes when you call that particular function. So this is actually a very basic boilerplate template and it just returns a hello with a query string parameter that you attach to the URL. So we'll use this once we are, so we'll use the URL once we have deployed the functionality. So again, let's go back to the serverless.yml file. Then we have the events. So the first event is always the trigger. So the trigger is again HTTP. The method is a get method. Now this auth level represents whether you want the HTTP endpoint to be anonymous so that anybody can access it, or you want to make it protected by having either function or admin. So if you have a function, then you have to also attach the function key with the particular URL. And if it's the admin, you have to attach the admin key to that particular endpoint. So for the time being, let's leave it as anonymous. Again, we have another function and this function also returns the same. So overall, there are two functions that will be installed, the hello and the goodbye. So let's deploy this function and let's see what happens. Everything else is commented. So you can see that the serverless application has been deployed. So let's go and check these URLs that have been printed at the end. So if I copy one of these URLs, if I paste it, you can see that you have to give a query parameter as well. So let's give a query parameter called name. And you get a message like this. So again, there were two, the other one was hello. And this does. So if I go to my Azure app function, I can go to my function app. And let's click on functions. So here you can see two functions, hello and goodbye. So let's click on any one of them. So if I go to the code plus test, you'll see that there's a binding file created. So the name of this binding file is function.json, and here it consists of the binding for that particular function. So it is basically an HTTP trigger, and the direction is input, and the name is so the name of the object is request, and the auth level is anonymous. So these values we got from the serverless itself. So basically these particular values are transposed to the functions.json. So if you keep changing values here, so let's say if you change it from anonymous to function, then that will get changed in the function.json. So this function.json is something that gets automatically created when you do a serverless deploy. Again, if you do not specify an output for an HTTP trigger, then the output automatically becomes HTTP as well. And here it also points to the source code and the entry point for the source code. So this is the function that you just saw within your source folder. Again, let's look at the integration. So the integration is also based on how the function.json file is. So here the input is again HTTP. Here the authorization level is anonymous. And if you want to look at the code, or if you want to look at the logs for your particular function, you can just go to monitor. Again, the function keys, because it's an anonymous request, it's not mandatory to put the function keys within your URL. So, but you can do that as an aside. So let's go back to our code plus test, and let's get the URL. Let's copy it here, and let's run this again. So again, it's the same URL. So you can get the URL from your Azure console as well. So again, let me just give the parameter as name equal to test, and you can see that you get a response hello.test. So this is how the basic functionality of serverless works in Azure, and I'll see you in the next lecture.